This presentation attempts to explain where the weights come from when we calculate a weighted average, which is what we do when we want to form an index number, for example, the Consumer Price Index that tells us about consumer inflation. So let's look at the Consumer Price Index and look at the weights which are included in the CPI. Firstly, the Consumer Price Index is looking at consumer goods that we buy on a regular basis. It's looking at the price of those consumer goods. So the first thing that we do is we decide which consumer goods we're going to include in our basket of goods when we want to look at the CPI. And the second thing we have to do is, of course, record their prices at a moment in time. So we first decide which goods we're going to include, and then we record their prices. And from these prices, we construct what's called a weighted average. And that helps us to turn these prices into an index. Now, this weighted average is the problem because we have to take the prices of the goods that we think we buy on a regular basis and multiply each price by a weight. Now, the weight is anything between 0 and 1. And it's a question of where do these weights come from and how do we decide how big they should be. So as you can see here, we take the price of the good, which is in this case a shirt, we multiply it by the weight, which in this case is 0.3, and we arrive at the number 9 pounds. We do the same with mobile phones. The price of a mobile phone could be £350. We multiply it by the weight, which in this case is 0.2, and we arrive at £70. We take the price of a cup of coffee, we multiply it by its weight, which in this case, shall we say, is 0.1, and we arrive at £35. Now we do this for all the goods that we buy, and in calculating the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, we take about 700 of these goods that a regular household buys regularly. Okay, and then we calculate the weighted prices, and then we find an average of the weighted prices. And this is our index number. So the question we're focusing on here is, where did we get the weights from? Where did these weights come from? And we know that they are between 0 and 1. So what do these weights represent? Well, the short answer is the weights represent how much of our income we spend on the particular good. So let's take a couple of examples. The price of a mobile phone may be £350. So this is quite a high price, but most households don't buy mobile phones very often. They may buy them twice a year or even less. And so the weight attached to the price of the mobile phone is relatively low, because even though the price is high, we don't really buy them very often, and so we don't spend a lot of our income on mobile phones. However, if we take another example, like a shirt, the price here is much lower, but we do buy shirts more often than we buy mobile phones, and therefore, even though the price is low and doesn't represent a great amount of our income, the fact that we buy them more often gives it a weight of 0.3, which is higher than the weight that we gave to the mobile phone price. So this is the origin of the weights. We see that the weights that we use in calculating the weighted average symbolize the percentage of our income, of our annual income, that we actually spend on these goods. And by multiplying the prices of the goods by the weights, we come to a weighted price, and this weighted price is then averaged across all the goods that we buy. And this gives us a weighted average. And this is the basis of forming an index number. So it's a question of where these weights come from, and we can see that these weights come from the percentage of our income that we spend on these goods.